Poor girl hugs her little brother in the rain when a young billionaire says, "Please come to my house to warm up." What happens next is unbelievable. The rain fell mercilessly on that autumn night, turning the streets into dark little rivers. Thaya Monroe drove his car slowly, the windshield wipers working at maximum speed to try and improve the near-zero visibility. What should have been a simple trip back home after a long day at the office had turned into a slow and careful journey through the storm. The car's headlights briefly illuminated something unusual on the sidewalk. Thaya slowed down even more, narrowing his eyes to see better through the curtain of water. His heart leaped when he realized what he had seen. Two small figures huddled under the narrow awning of a closed shop, completely vulnerable to the storm's fury. Stopping the car at the curb, Thaya hesitated for a moment. The big city had taught him to be cautious, but something about that scene deeply disturbed him. He turned on his emergency lights, and for an instant, the headlights better illuminated the two children, a bigger girl protectively hugging a little boy who was crying against her chest. Both were soaked, trembling visibly, their faces marked by pure terror. Without a second thought, Thaya grabbed the umbrella from the passenger seat and got out of the car. The cold rain hit him immediately, drenching his expensive suit in seconds. He walked quickly to the awning, approaching the children carefully so as not to frighten them further. "Are you two okay?" he finally asked, keeping a safe distance. The girl looked up with frightened eyes. Her face was soaked, a mixture of rain and tears. Her brown eyes were wide with fear, and her lower lip was trembling. "We can't find our mommy," she stammered, her voice broken by small, stifled sobs. The boy cried even harder at the word "mommy," hiding his face again in his sister's shoulder. "Say, are you lost?" Thaya asked gently, moving a little closer but still keeping his distance so as not to increase the children's obvious fear. The girl nodded frantically, tightening her protective hug around her brother. "We were at the playground," she explained, trying to keep her voice steady. "Jules wanted to see a dog and I followed him. When we looked again, we couldn't see Mommy anywhere." The words came out quickly, as if she were reliving the terrifying moment of separation. "We walked a long way trying to find our way back," she continued, "but now it's dark, and we don't know where we are." Thaya felt something tighten in his chest. He looked at his watch, almost 9 at night. The temperature was dropping quickly, and the rain showed no signs of letting up. "How long have you been here?" he asked, genuinely concerned. "A long time. It was still light out when we got lost." "Hours, then. Alone in the rain and cold for hours, lost and terrified." "What's your name?" he asked, crouching down to get closer to her height. "Tessa," she answered, still wary. "And this is Jules. He's only 3. Jules lifted his wet face for a moment, looking at Thaya with huge red eyes from crying so much, before hiding his face again. "It's nice to meet you, Tess and Jules. I'm Thaya." A strong gust of wind blew more rain under the awning, making both children shrink back even more. Jules let out a sharp whimper, and Tess tried to shield him with her own body, even though she was shivering herself. Thaya looked at his parked car with its emergency lights flashing, then at the drenched and terrified children. He could call the police, but that would mean leaving these frightened kids waiting even longer in the cold. "Do you know where you live?" "An address, maybe," he tried. Tess shook her head, looking even more scared by the question. "We live near a playground with a big slide," she said, her voice trembling. "But Mommy always holds our hand on the way. I don't know how to get back." Her eyes filled with tears again, but Tess took a deep breath, trying to stay strong for her brother. Thaya made his decision. "I have a car right there," he said carefully, pointing to the vehicle. "I live just a few minutes from here. It's too cold for you to stay here. Why don't you come with me to get dry? We can call the police and look for your mom from there." The fear in Tess's eyes intensified. She clutched Jules even tighter. "Say, Mommy says never to go with strangers," she whispered, backing against the wall. "And never get in a car with people we don't know." Thaya nodded. "Your mum is right. That's very good advice." He stood up straight and took a small step back, giving the children more space. "I understand you're scared, but it's very cold out here, and the rain isn't going to stop anytime soon." He paused, thinking carefully about what to say. I have hot chocolate at my place. We can call the police from there to help find your mum." Jules perked up at the words, "hot chocolate," his eyes showing a brief flash of interest amidst his fear. Tess seemed torn, looking from her shivering brother to the well-dressed man in front of her. A clap of thunder echoed in the distance, making Jules let out a muffled cry. "Look," said Thaya, pointing to the car. "You can see my car from here. There's a child's car seat in the back." It was true, he kept it for when his niece visited, though that rarely happened. "I won't hurt you, I promise. Please, come to my house to warm up. It's just until we find your mum." Something in the sincerity of his words, or perhaps the mention of the car seat, seemed to finally convince Tess. She looked long at the car, then at her trembling brother. "Okay," she agreed in a low voice, "but only until we find Mommy." "Deal," Thaya replied, feeling an unexpected sense of relief. Holding the umbrella over the children, he quickly guided them to the car. Tess kept Jules hugged tightly against her, as if she feared someone might snatch him away at any moment. "See, the car seat," Thaya pointed out, opening the back door. Tess eyed the car's interior with suspicion, but the sight of the colorful child's seat seemed to reassure her a little. "Jules, you have to sit in the special seat," she told her brother, taking on an almost motherly tone. "It's safer." With some reluctance, Tess allowed Thaya to help her place Jules in the car seat. The boy whimpered a little at being separated from his sister, but calmed down when she sat next to him and held his hand. "I'll turn on the heat," said Thaya, getting into the driver's seat. The warmth soon began to fill the car, drawing sighs of relief from the children. The drive to Thaya's apartment was tense and quiet. In the rearview mirror, he could see Tess whispering reassuring words to Jules, who had finally stopped crying, seemingly mesmerized by the smooth motion of the car and the comforting warmth. "We're almost there," Thaya announced, breaking the silence. "Kat, I live in a tall building, close to here." Tess nodded without saying anything, her expression still watchful and suspicious. The doorman of the luxurious building raised his eyebrows upon seeing his always solitary resident arrive with two drenched and clearly frightened children. "Good evening, Mr. Monroe," he greeted, looking curiously at Tess and Jules. "Good evening, Howard," Thaya replied. "I found these children lost in the storm. We're trying to locate their mother." The doorman nodded, though his eyes remained full of questions. In the elevator, Tess grew even more tense, sticking close to Thaya's leg as she watched the lit-up buttons. Jules had stopped crying, but his eyes were still wide. "Are you hungry?" Thaya asked, trying to ease the tension. Jules nodded immediately, but Tess hesitated. "A little," she finally confessed in a low voice. Thaya's apartment took up the entire top floor of the building. When the elevator doors opened, even Tess couldn't contain a small gasp of surprise. The space was immense and elegant, but lacked the warmth of a home. Everything was perfectly arranged, as if no one really lived there. There were no personal photos or any sign of everyday clutter. "You're safe here," Thaya said, guiding them inside. "Let's find some dry clothes for you first." He led the children to the master bathroom, which was larger than many bedrooms. Tess looked at everything with wide eyes, never letting go of Jules's hand. "I don't have any children's clothes," Thaya admitted, "but we can improvise." He returned from the closet with two soft t-shirts. "These can work as nightgowns while your clothes dry." Tess took the t-shirts with her free hand, still holding Jules securely with the other. "Where can we change?" she asked, her voice shy but firm. "Of course," Thaya backed away. "You can use this bathroom. There are clean towels in that cabinet. I'll be in the kitchen making something warm. Call if you need any help." He closed the door and went to the kitchen, suddenly aware of the silence that always dominated his apartment. As he looked for something that might appeal to the children, Thaya realized this was probably the first time in years that anyone other than himself, his occasional assistant, or the cleaning crew had set foot in here. After a few minutes, the bathroom door opened slowly. Tess appeared first, still holding tightly to Jules's hand. The t-shirts came down to the children's ankles. Both were cleaner but still visibly shaken. Jules looked like he was about to fall asleep, but his eyes remained alert. "Better?" asked Thaya, noticing they were both still shivering a little. Jules didn't answer, hiding partially behind his sister. Tess nodded shyly. "Thank you for the clothes," she said, her voice almost inaudible. Come on. Thea gestured to the high stools in the kitchen. I found some soup that's almost ready. He helped the children onto the stools, impressed by how Tess insisted on seating Jules first, making sure he was safe before settling in beside him. Do you like vegetable noodle soup? He asked, and serving generous portions. We'll eat anything, Tess replied quickly. Thea placed the bowls in front of them, along with pieces of soft bread. Careful, it's hot, he warned. Jules blew on the soup dramatically before bringing the spoon to his mouth with trembling hands. His eyes widened slightly as he tasted it, and for the first time the boy seemed to relax a little. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Jules devoured his food eagerly. Tess ate more slowly, her watchful eyes alternating between her brother and Thea. So, Thea began, you were at the park with your mum and got lost following a dog. Tess put down her spoon, her small shoulders seeming to carry a huge weight. We were at the park, she confirmed. Mommy let us play on the slide while she finished some sewing. She always brings work when we go to play. She paused. Then a little dog came by, and Jules wanted to see it. We were just going to look for a second, but then we couldn't see where Mommy was anymore. Tears began to well up in Jules's eyes. We looked for a long time, Tess continued, her own voice choking up. Fast then it started to rain, and we tried to find our way back home, but everything looked different. I want my mommy, Jules murmured, his lip trembling. I know, buddy, Thea said gently, and we're going to find her, I promise. But right now it's very late and it's still raining hard. You two need to get some rest. A loud clap of thunder echoed outside, making Jules flinch. Tess immediately put an arm around her brother's shoulders in a protective gesture that seemed natural for her. You can sleep here tonight, Thea said. I have guest rooms, but maybe you'd prefer to stay together. We want to stay together, Tess replied quickly, as if the idea of being separated from her brother was unthinkable. Of course, Thea smiled softly. I'll get the living room sofa ready for you. After they finished their soup, Thea led the children to the living room. He improvised a bed on the large leather sofa, laying out soft sheets, pillows, and several blankets. Is this okay? He asked, watching the children settle under the covers. Tess nodded, her eyes already heavy with sleep. Jules snuggled against her, his thumb finding its way to his mouth. If you need anything during the night, my room is right over there. Thea pointed to a door down the hall. Just call out. He hesitated, feeling like he should say something more, but not knowing exactly what. Good night, then, he said finally, dimming the lights. Good night, Mr. Thayer, Tess replied politely. Just Thayer is fine, he smiled. He was about to leave when Jules's small voice surprised him. Thank you for the soup. From his room, Thayer could hear the children's whispers, gradually fading until silence returned. Lying in bed, he stared at the ceiling, thinking about the unlikely series of events that night. If he hadn't decided to drive down that street, if he hadn't noticed the children in the rain, if he had just driven past as so many other cars probably did. Restless, he got up about an hour later to check on the children. On the sofa, Tess and Jules were sleeping soundly, wrapped in each other's arms. Jules had one hand tightly gripping his sister's t-shirt, even in his sleep. Thayer adjusted the blanket that had slipped off, covering them better against the cold. For a moment he stood there, watching their peaceful breathing, feeling something strange and almost forgotten stir inside his chest. The rain was still falling outside, pattering against the apartment windows. But inside, for the first time in years, Thayer Monroe's silent home breathed with human presence. And as he walked back to his room, he didn't realize that his life had already begun to change at that very moment. The morning sun streamed through the apartment's large windows, creating pools of golden light on the hardwood floor. Thayer had been up for a while, working quietly on his laptop in the kitchen. Occasionally, he glanced toward the sofa where Tess and Jules were still sleeping soundly, huddled together just as he had found them during the night. He had cancelled all his meetings for the day, something he rarely did, with a brief message to his assistant mentioning a personal emergency. The words felt strange even to him. Personal emergencies were not part of his meticulously planned life. Around 9 in the morning, a small movement caught his attention. Tess was sitting up on the sofa, rubbing her eyes with the backs of her hands, her dark hair pointed in various directions, and the oversized t-shirt was slipping off one shoulder. She looked disoriented for a moment, glancing around the apartment as if trying to remember where she was. "Good morning," Thea said softly, so as not to startle her. Tess turned quickly toward him, the memory apparently rushing back. "Good morning," she replied in a hoarse voice. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, approaching slowly. She nodded, but Thea noticed something odd about her face. Her cheeks were unusually flushed, contrasting with the paleness of the rest of her skin. "Are you feeling okay?" he asked, now concerned. "I'm a little cold," she admitted, pulling the blanket higher. Cold. The apartment was comfortably warm, and the morning sun was already heating the room. Thea came closer and, after a brief hesitation, gently placed his hand on the girl's forehead. "Tess, you're burning up," he said, alarmed. Just then, Jules also stirred under the blankets, letting out a low groan. When he opened his eyes, Thea noticed they were glassy, and his cheeks were also flushed. "My head hurts," the boy murmured, his voice even more fragile than usual. Thea felt a wave of panic. It was one thing to offer temporary shelter to 2 lost children, but quite another to care for 2 sick ones. He had no idea what to do. For you were in the rain for a long time yesterday," he said, more to himself than to them. Tess made a move to get up. "We need to keep looking for Mommy," she said, though her small body was visibly trembling. No. Thea gently stopped her. "You both need to rest now. You have fevers." "What's a fever?" asked Jules, looking confused at his sister. "It's when you get hot and feel sick," Tess explained, in a motherly tone that seemed out of place for someone so young. She herself seemed to be struggling to keep her eyes open. Thea picked up his phone, stepping a few feet away. Who should he call? A hospital? That seemed like an overreaction. His knowledge of childcare was practically zero. He decided to call the only person who might be able to help at that moment. "Dr. Winters, it's Thea Monroe. I know it's Sunday, but I have a situation. I need your help." Dr. Sarah Winters had been his private physician for years and, more importantly, had been a pediatrician before specializing in internal medicine. After a quick explanation of the unusual situation, omitting the fact that he had brought 2 unknown children into his apartment without notifying the authorities, she agreed to make a house call within the hour. Thea went back to the children, who now seemed even more listless. "A very good doctor is coming to see you," he explained. "In the meantime, I think you should take a lukewarm bath and eat something light." "I'm not hungry," murmured Jules, snuggling closer to his sister. "I know, buddy, but it will help you feel better," Thea insisted gently. Helping 2 feverish children take a bath was a completely new experience for Thea. He filled the tub with lukewarm water, not too hot, he reminded himself, and provided soft towels. Tess insisted she could help her brother on her own, but she was so weak that Thea had to stay nearby, turning his back to give them privacy but remaining within reach in case they needed help. After the bath, he found 2 clean t-shirts to serve as pajamas again. The children's original clothes, which he had put out to dry overnight, were still damp from the rain. Back on the sofa, now with fresh sheets that Thea had changed while they were bathing, the children seemed slightly better, though still feverish. He managed to convince them to eat a few spoonfuls of oatmeal with honey, something he found in the back of his pantry that vaguely reminded him of his own childhood. The doorbell rang exactly an hour later. Dr. Winters, a woman in her 40s with a kind face framed by short, graying hair, entered carrying her medical bag. She gave Thea an inquisitive look before turning her attention to the children. "Hello," she said with a warm smile, approaching the sofa. "I'm Dr. Sarah. I heard you 2 aren't feeling very well today." Tess watched the doctor with cautious eyes, instinctively pulling Jules closer. "It's okay," Thea assured her. "She's my doctor. She's going to help you get better." Dr. Winters examined the children with gentle efficiency, checking their temperature, throats, ears, and lungs. Tess allowed the examination with a serious expression, while Jules alternated between looking scared at the doctor and seeking comfort in Thea's gaze. The flu, the doctor finally diagnosed, packing away her instruments. Likely due to prolonged exposure to the rain and cold. Nothing serious, but they need rest, plenty of fluids, and observation. She took some medication from her bag and carefully explained to Thea how to administer it, one to lower the fever and another for their sore throats. Normally, I'd ask about their medical history, she commented in a low voice as they moved away from the children. Allergies, pre-existing conditions. I don't have that information, Thea admitted, feeling suddenly inadequate. Dr. Winters studied him for a moment. Thea, I understand this isn't a conventional situation, but as a doctor I have to ask, is there anyone who should be notified about the condition of these children? Thea briefly explained how he had found Tess and Jules, lost in the storm. I planned to look for their mother today, he concluded, but I wanted to make sure they were okay first. The doctor nodded, seeming satisfied with the explanation. The medications I've prescribed are safe for most children. Watch them closely for any adverse reactions, though it's unlikely. And call me any time if the fever doesn't break, or if they get worse. After the doctor left, Thea made tea with honey and lemon, something his own mother used to make when he was sick as a child. It was one of the few clear memories he had of her. This will help your throats, he explained, placing the mugs on the coffee table. Jules made a face upon tasting it, but Tess encouraged him to keep drinking, taking small sips from her own mug to set an example. The next few hours passed in a slow, quiet rhythm. Thea found some cartoons on TV that kept Jules entertained, while Tess alternated between napping and observing her surroundings with curious eyes, despite her fever. He administered the medication as instructed, constantly checking the children's temperature by placing the back of his hand against their foreheads, a gesture that became more natural each time. In the middle of the afternoon, Tess was awake while Jules slept soundly beside her. She watched Thea, who had returned to working on his laptop, occasionally making calls in a low voice. "You didn't go to work because of us?" she asked suddenly. Thea looked up, surprised by the question. "Yes, but don't worry about it. I can work from home today." "Mommy can never miss work," Tess commented, fiddling distractedly with the edge of the blanket. "Sure, even when we're sick." Something about the simplicity of that observation made Thea feel uncomfortable. His own problems, postponed meetings, unanswered emails, seemed trivial compared to the reality this child was describing. "What does your mom do?" he asked, closing his laptop and moving to sit in an armchair near the sofa. "She's a seamstress," Tess replied. "She makes clothes for a big store. Sometimes she brings work home and sews late into the night." There was a moment of silence, and then Tess looked directly at Thea, her eyes large and serious despite the fever. "Do you think Mommy is looking for us?" she asked, her small voice revealing the fear she was trying to hide. The question hit Thea like a punch. Of course their mother would be looking for them, probably frantic. 2 small children missing for nearly 24 hours. He couldn't imagine the anguish the woman must be feeling. "Absolutely," he answered without hesitation. "Any mother would be looking for her children. As soon as you two are better, we'll go look for her. I promise." Tess's face lit up with the first genuine smile Thea had seen on her, a smile of pure relief that completely transformed her small face, despite her cheeks still being flushed with fever. "Thank you," she said simply. That smile caused a strange sensation in Thea's chest, a tightness that wasn't unpleasant, but intense and unexpected. They sat in silence for some time, only the low sound of the TV filling the room. Thea thought Tess had fallen asleep again, but then she spoke, her voice almost a whisper. "We live with Mommy in a small apartment. It's not pretty like yours, but it's our home." Thea said nothing, feeling he was witnessing something rare, a child opening up her inner world. "Mommy works a lot," Tess continued. "She's a seamstress. Daddy died when Jules was a baby. I remember him a little, but Jules doesn't remember him at all." She paused, her fingers fiddling nervously with the edge of the oversized t-shirt. "We share what we have. Sometimes it's not much, but Mommy always says the important thing is that we're together." Thea felt a wave of admiration for this unknown mother, struggling alone to raise 2 children. At night, when she thinks we're asleep, Tess hesitated, her voice dropping even lower. "I see Mommy crying. She sits at the table after sewing and cries very quietly. I think she misses Daddy. Or maybe she's just tired from working so much. The raw honesty of that observation made Thea swallow hard. He tried to imagine the scene, an exhausted woman crying silently so as not to wake her children, carrying the weight of supporting a family all by herself. That must be hard for her, he commented softly. Tess nodded, her eyes now shining with unshed tears. And now we're gone, she whispered. It was my fault. If we hadn't gone off to play, we wouldn't have gotten lost. A single tear rolled down her feverish cheek. I was supposed to take better care of Jules. Mommy always says I'm the big sister, and I have to help look after him. Thea's heart ached to see this 5-year-old child taking on such a heavy burden. Without thinking, he moved closer and gently took her hand. Tess, look at me, he asked, waiting until she lifted her eyes. You just wanted to play. This isn't your fault. Kids get lost sometimes, even when they're being careful. She stared at him, wanting to believe it. And you are an amazing sister, he continued. You protected Jules the whole time. You stayed with him under that awning, kept him warm, and took care of him when you were both scared. Your mum would be so proud of how you looked after your brother. Tess sniffled, absorbing his words. You really think so? I'm sure of it, Thea affirmed. And we will find your mum soon, I promise. She must be looking for you everywhere. Something in the girl's face relaxed, as if a small weight had been lifted from her tired shoulders. She squeezed Thea's hand lightly before letting go and settling more comfortably beside her sleeping brother. I think I'll sleep a little too, she murmured, her eyes already closing. Good idea, Thea replied softly. Resting will help you both get better faster. Within minutes, Tess was also fast asleep. Thea remained seated beside them for a long time, watching their rhythmic breathing, their faces still flushed with fever, but now relaxed in sleep. Something was changing inside him, something he couldn't name but felt growing with every hour spent with these children. It was a strange and new feeling, like a long-dormant muscle being slowly awakened. As he watched Tess and Jules sleep, Thea made a silent promise, not just to the children, but also to the unknown mother who cried alone at night, carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. He would find her, and somehow he would help this little family. The bond that had started as a charitable gesture on a stormy night had silently transformed into something deeper, something that not even Thea, with all his logic and rationality, could explain. After 2 days of rest, warm baths, and medicine, the fevers finally broke. Tess and Jules' cheeks returned to their natural color, and the energy of childhood began to reappear, especially in Jules, who now explored the apartment with growing curiosity. Careful with that, it's fragile, Thea warned gently as the boy approached an abstract sculpture on the shelf. To his surprise, he found he didn't really care about the possibility of something breaking. The objects that once seemed so important were now just things. Can we look for Mommy today? Tess asked, entering the room already dressed in her original clothes, now clean and ironed. The faded t-shirt and shorts with small patches contrasted sharply with the luxurious surroundings, reminding Thea of how different their worlds were. Yes, he replied, feeling a mix of determination and a strange pang he couldn't identify. You're much better now. Let's start at the place where we met. Tess's face lit up with hope, while Jules clapped his hands excitedly. We're gonna see Mommy, the boy exclaimed, jumping in place. Thea smiled, admiring how the children, despite everything they had been through, maintained that capacity for immediate, unreserved hope. Part of him envied that simplicity. Let's have breakfast first, he suggested, so we have energy for the search. In the last few days, he had gone grocery shopping specifically with the children in mind. The refrigerator, once practically empty except for a few pre-made meals and drinks, now contained milk, fresh fruit, yogurt, and juice. The pantry shelves had also been restocked with colorful cereals, bread, cookies, and other items that would never have made it onto his usual shopping list. After breakfast, Thea helped Jules put on his sneakers while Tess waited patiently, her small, serious face reflecting the importance of the mission ahead. "Oh, what if we don't find her?" she asked suddenly, her voice low so her brother wouldn't hear. Thea stopped what he was doing and looked at her. "We will find her, Tess. Maybe not today, But we will find your mum. I promise. She nodded, and Thea realized that in just a few days he had gained something precious, this child's trust. It was a responsibility he had no intention of betraying. The day was clear and sunny, with no sign of the storm that had brought their fates together. As they left the building, Howard, the doorman, smiled at the children, who now greeted him by name. "Good luck with the search, Mr. Monroe," he said with a respectful nod. Thea nodded, noticing how the news that he was caring for 2 children had spread quickly among the building's staff. At any other time, he would have been bothered by the whispers and curious glances. Now, strangely, it didn't seem to matter. The car was parked in front of the building. Tess immediately took on the responsibility of helping Jules get settled in the car seat, buckling the belt, with the seriousness of a pilot performing pre-flight checks. "Very good," Thea approved, admiring her competence. The drive to the spot where he had found the children was short. They parked near the awning, now bathed in sunlight, so different from the stormy night. Thea noted how the place seemed smaller and less menacing in the daylight. "Do you recognize this place?" he asked, helping the children out of the car. Tess looked around, her eyes scanning the street, the sidewalk, the shops. Slowly, she nodded. "This is where you found us," she said, her voice a mix of relief at recognizing the spot and apprehension for what was to come. Jules held his sister's hand, suddenly quieter, as if the memory of that frightening night had returned. "All right," Thea said, crouching down to their level. "Now we need to try and remember where you came from." "Which way did you walk before you got here?" Tess frowned, concentrating intensely. She turned slowly, looking in every direction, as if trying to mentally reconstruct that fateful afternoon. "We came from that way," she said finally, pointing to a street on the left. "Fus, I'm sure of it." They began to walk in that direction, Thea keeping a slow pace so the children could observe everything around them. At each intersection, Tess would stop, look around, and try to decide which path they had taken. "Then it was that way," she murmured at one point, indicating another direction. "I remember that candy store." They continued for a few more blocks, moving further away from the commercial area and into residential neighborhoods. Occasionally, Tess recognized a landmark, a particularly large tree, a colorful wall, a street sign. But her directions began to grow more hesitant. After nearly an hour of walking, they reached a small playground. Tess stopped abruptly, her eyes wide. "Here!" she exclaimed. "We played here!" Jules let go of Thea's hand and ran to the swings, apparently recognizing the place as well. "Is this the park where you were with your mom?" Thea asked, feeling a flash of hope. Tess frowned, looking around more carefully. Slowly, she shook her head. "No, this isn't it," she said, disappointed. "Ours has a big slide, shaped like a rocket, and it doesn't have these swings." Thea's hope faded a little, but he maintained an optimistic expression. "That's okay. At least we know you passed through here." "It's a start." They continued their exploration, with Tess growing more frustrated with each corner that failed to trigger a clear memory. Her initial confidence gave way to a growing anxiety. "I don't remember anymore," she finally confessed, her voice trembling slightly. "Everything looks different when it's not raining." Thea placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, Tess. It's normal to get confused in new places, especially when you were scared." They stopped at a small square with benches. The midday sun was strong, and Thea bought water and sandwiches from a nearby deli. As they ate, he watched the children, noticing how Jules seemed oblivious to the gravity of the situation, happy just to be out and about, while Tess carried the weight of responsibility on her small shoulders. "Tess," he began softly, "do you have any idea how far you lived from the park where you got lost?" She chewed her sandwich thoughtfully before answering. "We always walk," she said. "It's not too far, but Mommy always tells us not to go alone because we have to cross big streets." "And do you remember the name of the street where you live, or any place nearby, like a school, a church, a market?" Tess shook her head, frustrated with herself. "I know there's a bakery nearby, and a small park, but I don't know the name." After finishing their lunch, they resumed their walk. They covered a few more streets, with Tess growing more downcast with each failed attempt to recognize the way. Finally, As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Thea realized they needed to stop. The children were tired, especially Jules, who was now asking to be carried every few steps. "I think we've done enough for today," he said, picking Jules up. The boy immediately rested his head on Thea's shoulder, exhausted. "But we still haven't found Mommy," Tess protested, though her own voice betrayed her fatigue. "We'll keep looking tomorrow," Thea promised. "Now you need to rest. You just got over the flu, remember?" On the way back to the car, Tess walked in silence, clearly disappointed. When they were almost there, she stopped suddenly and looked up at Thea with teary eyes. "I should remember," she said, her voice choked. "But I don't know where our house is. I just know it's not close." Thea knelt, balancing Jules on one arm while placing his other hand on Tess's shoulder. "You're trying so hard, and that's what matters," he said. "Finding your way in a big city is hard even for adults." A tear streamed down her face. "What if we never find Mommy again?" "We will," Thea stated with conviction. "There are other ways to look. Tomorrow we'll try again with a different plan." In the car, as he adjusted the seatbelt for a half-asleep Jules, Thea watched Tess staring out the window at the place where they had been found. Her small face reflected a mixture of fear and determination that was moving. "You know," he said, starting the engine, "sometimes we need to take a few steps back before we can find the right path forward." Tess didn't reply, but her eyes met Thea's in the rear-view mirror. The trust she saw there, the absolute faith that he would somehow fix everything, was both a burden and a gift. As he drove back home, and when had his apartment become home for them, Thea was already mentally planning the next steps. There would be other ways to search, other resources to explore. This frustrating search was only the beginning. The return to the apartment after the failed attempt to find their way home was quiet. Jules had fallen asleep in the car, exhausted from the long walk. Tess kept her eyes fixed on the window, her small face wearing an expression that seemed too heavy for a 5-year-old child. Thea watched the children in the rearview mirror as he drove, feeling a helplessness he wasn't accustomed to. At his company, problems had clear solutions, analysis and strategies, resources. But this problem, finding these children's home with almost no concrete information, seemed increasingly challenging. When they arrived, he carried a sleeping Jules, while Tess followed them in silence. Howard, the doorman, held the door for them with an understanding smile. "Ta-duff day?" he asked in a low voice, noticing Tess's downcast expression. "We're trying," Thea replied simply. In the apartment, he placed Jules on the sofa that had become the children's bed. The boy didn't even stir, too exhausted to notice the transfer from Thea's arms to the soft cushions. "You must be hungry," Thea said, turning to Tess. "How about a special dinner tonight?" It was a transparent attempt to cheer her up, but Tess just shrugged, a gesture that seemed borrowed from someone much older. "Whatever," she muttered, sitting on the edge of the sofa and taking off her shoes with mechanical movements. Thea knelt in front of her, seeking her gaze. "Hey, we're going to find your mom." Today was just the first day of the search. Her eyes finally met his, shining with unshed tears. "What if we never find her?" she asked in a whisper, as if putting the fear into words could make it more real. "We will find her," Thea assured her, his voice firm. "There are many ways to look for people. Tomorrow we'll try a different way." She nodded, not entirely convinced, but wanting to believe. While preparing dinner, mac and cheese, something he discovered was a favorite of the children, Thea thought about new strategies, the police department, social services, but something made him hesitate. Once authorities were involved, the children would likely be taken to a temporary shelter, while the search for their mother continued. The thought of Tess and Jules, scared in a strange environment and separated from him, bothered him deeply. "It doesn't make sense," he muttered to himself, stirring the sauce. Why was he, a man who always kept relationships at a safe distance, who had built a life of efficiency and self-reliance, so reluctant to hand the children over to the care of professionals? Dinner was quieter than usual. Jules woke up hungry and ate with enthusiasm, seemingly forgetting the day's disappointment. But Tess just picked at her food, taking small, occasional bites. "Tess," Thea began, deciding to address a practical matter, "I need to ask you some things that might help us find your mom." She looked up from her plate, suddenly attentive. "Do you know your mum's name?" "Evie," she answered promptly. "A start." "Evie," Thea repeated. "And her last name? Her family name?" Tess frowned, thinking hard. After a moment, she shook her head. "I don't know," she admitted, looking embarrassed. "Everyone just calls her Evie." "And your last name?" Thea tried. "Do you know your full name?" Again, the girl shook her head. "The teacher at school just calls us by our first names." It was a significant obstacle. A city this size probably had dozens, maybe hundreds of women named Evie. Without a last name, the search would be much more complicated. "Okay," Thea said, keeping his tone optimistic. "There's other information that can help us. Do you remember the name of your school?" "Garden something," Tess replied, trying hard. "It has flowers in the name, I think. And the place where your mum works, the store she sews for. It's a big store, with pretty clothes in the window, but I don't know the name." Each answer was a reminder of the limited view young children have of the world. Names, addresses, details that adults take for granted are simply not part of their universe. After dinner, Thea put on a movie. A colorful animated film that kept Jules entertained and even managed to draw a few smiles from Tess. He watched the children as they watched, noticing how quickly they had adapted to the routine of his home. Jules's shoes always lined up near the door, the cup of water Tess kept on the side table in case they woke up thirsty during the night, the drawings Jules made that now decorated the refrigerator door, small marks of presence that, somehow, had transformed his impersonal space into something more welcoming. When the movie ended, it was bedtime. The nightly routine was already established. Bath, brushing teeth. A bedtime story, something Thea never imagined he would do, but which was now his favorite part of the day. Tess chose one of the children's books he had bought, one about a family of rabbits who get lost in the forest but find their way back by following the moonlight. The choice did not go unnoticed by Thea. "They found their home," Jules commented sleepily as the story ended, his eyes already closing. "Yes, they did," Thea agreed, tucking the blanket around him. "We're gonna find ours too," the boy murmured, more a statement than a question, before falling asleep. Tess was still awake, watching her brother with protective eyes. "You should sleep too," Thea suggested gently. "Tomorrow will be a new day." She nodded, settling down next to Jules. "Good night, Thea." "Good night, Tess," he replied, dimming the lights. In his room, Thea couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, his mind working through possible solutions. Local newspapers, posters with the children's pictures. Visiting every preschool in the area with a name related to flowers or gardens. It was almost midnight when he heard it. A low, almost inaudible sound, a choked sob coming from the hallway. He got up immediately and opened his door. On the sofa bed in the living room, Jules was sitting up, crying openly now. Tess was awake beside him, hugging him and whispering words of comfort, though her own voice was choked with emotion. "What happened?" Thea asked, approaching quickly. "He had a bad dream," Tess explained, stroking her brother's hair. "He dreamed that we were never going to see Mommy again." Jules looked up at Thea, his little face red and wet with tears. "I want my mommy," he sobbed. "I want to go home." The desperation in the child's voice made something break inside Thea. He sat on the edge of the sofa, placing a gentle hand on the boy's back. "I know, buddy," he said softly. "I know you miss her." "It's been so long," Jules whimpered. "She must be sad without us." Tess, who had been trying so hard to be strong for her brother, finally let her own tears fall. "We're going to find her, right, Thea?" she asked, her voice small and fragile. There was so much hope, so much trust in her eyes that Thea felt the weight of responsibility like never before. "We will find her," he promised, opening his arms. To his surprise, both children moved toward him, seeking comfort. Jules nestled against his chest, his sobs gradually subsiding, while Tess rested her head on his shoulder, her silent tears wetting his t-shirt. Thea had never been a particularly physical person, uncomfortable with hugs or public displays of affection. But at that moment, with two vulnerable children seeking safety in his arms, it felt like the most natural thing in the world to wrap them in a protective embrace. "It's okay," he murmured, rocking them gently. "You're safe, and we will find your mum." "Promise?" Jules asked between sobs. "I promise," Thea answered, knowing he would do anything to keep that promise. They stayed like that for a long time. The children's crying eventually giving way to calmer breaths. Thea began to hum softly, an old lullaby his own mother used to sing, something he didn't even know he still remembered. His voice was nothing special, but the gentle melody seemed to soothe the children. Jules was the first to fall asleep again, exhausted from crying. Tess held on a little longer, her eyes struggling to stay open. "Can you stay here?" she asked sleepily. "Just until we fall asleep?" Thea nodded, settling more comfortably on the sofa without disturbing the children. "I'll stay right here." Satisfied, Tess finally closed her eyes, her small hand clutching his t-shirt as if she feared he might disappear during the night. Thea had planned to go back to his room once the children were sound asleep, but the warmth of their small bodies against his, the absolute trust with which they had surrendered to sleep in his arms, the silent responsibility of protecting these two vulnerable beings, all of it kept him motionless. He watched their sleeping faces, still marked by tears, but now peaceful. Jules with his thumb in his mouth, Tess with a serious expression even in sleep. Children who, in just a few days, had become so important to him in a way he never would have believed possible. Slowly, without realizing it, Thea also drifted off to sleep, still sitting on the sofa with the children nestled against him. For the first time in many years, he slept soundly, without the restless dreams or early awakenings that had accompanied him for so long. As the morning light began to filter through the curtains, illuminating the sleeping trio on the sofa, something had changed in the apartment. The clinical emptiness that had always characterized Thea's space, a place to eat and sleep, but never truly a home, was beginning to be filled with something new, something he couldn't name, but felt deeply. Howard, the doorman, coming up to deliver an urgent package that morning, used the emergency key when he got no response. Upon finding Thea asleep on the sofa with the two children in his arms, the older man smiled to himself, left the package silently on the table, and exited without making a sound. Thea woke to the sensation of small fingers touching his face. He opened his eyes to find Jules looking at him with curiosity. "You slept with us all night?" the boy asked, sounding impressed. "Looks like I did," Thea replied, realizing he had spent the entire night on the sofa, in a position that would surely make his back protest later. Tess was also awake, watching him with those serious, ancient eyes of hers. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" Thea asked, carefully straightening up. "For staying," she answered. "Jules always sleeps better when someone is close. At home, Mommy sometimes lets us sleep in her bed when it's thundering or when he's scared." The mention of their mother brought Thea back to the reality of his mission. As he prepared breakfast, pancakes with chocolate syrup, a special request from Jules, he decided to try a new approach. Tess," he began, placing a plate in front of her, "I have an idea for today. Instead of trying to walk around the city looking for familiar places, how about you tell me more about your house? Maybe draw what your home looks like, the neighborhood, things like that." Tess's eyes lit up at the suggestion. "I'm good at drawing. The teacher always puts my drawings on the classroom bulletin board." "I'm sure she does," Thea smiled. "After breakfast, we'll do that, okay?" As the children ate, Thea went back to thinking about the name. Evie. A pretty name, likely short for Evelyn, or maybe just Eve. Without a last name, it would be very difficult to locate her, but not impossible. "Tess," he said, deciding to try again. "Are you sure you don't remember your family's last name? Maybe your father's name?" She stopped eating, thoughtful. "Daddy's name was Aaron. I remember because Mommy always talks about him. She says I have his eyes." "Aaron," Thea repeated. "A name to work with, at least. And you never heard the last name. Maybe when your mum answers the phone, or when she gets letters." Tess shook her head again, frustrated with herself. "I'm sorry." "You don't need to be sorry," Thea assured her quickly. "You're helping a lot. And today, with your drawings, I'm sure we'll discover even more clues." The shy smile she gave him in return warmed something inside him. It was hard to search without concrete information, But Thea was determined not to give up. These children, Tess with her precocious maturity and deep eyes, Jules with his contagious joy and immediate trust, had found a place in his life, in his home, and God, he was beginning to realize, in his heart. As they finished breakfast, Thea was already planning the day ahead. Paper, colored pencils, time and patience, and maybe, if they were lucky, Tess's drawings would provide the clues they needed to finally find their way home. The emptiness of his apartment was being filled, not just by the physical presence of the children, but by something deeper and more lasting. Something that, Thea suspected, would remain even after they were gone. The dining table was covered with papers and colored pencils scattered in a creative chaos. Thea had bought a complete set of art supplies, determined to explore every possibility to find the children's home. Tess drew with concentration, her tongue sticking out slightly. Jules, beside her, scribbled enthusiastically, creating formless explosions of color. "Look, Thea! I made our house," Jules exclaimed, holding up his paper. "Incredible," Thea praised. "Can you explain each part to me?" Jules pointed to the colorful shapes. "This is Mommy, this is me, and this is Tess." Thea noticed there was no circle to represent a father. "Very good, Jules. You've captured all of you perfectly." Tess, meanwhile, was working on much more detailed drawings. "I finished this part," she finally announced. It was a depiction of a small, simple house with yellowish walls and a gabled roof. Tess had included cracks in the low wall that surrounded the yard. "This is our house," she explained. "It's small, but Mommy always keeps it very clean. Our room is in the back." Thea studied the drawing, noticing the details: a plant in a makeshift pot by the entrance, clothes hanging on a line, a patch on the roof. "This is very helpful, Tess. Do you remember the name of the street?" She shook her head. "No. But I also drew what's near our house." She showed another drawing with a broader view of the neighborhood. Thea could see a small square with broken benches, some simple buildings, and a church with a bell tower. "There's a little park near us," Tess explained. "It doesn't have toys like the big park, but we play ball there. And there's a church with a bell that rings every Sunday morning." She pointed to another element in the drawing, a disproportionately large tree. "There's a big tree on the corner. It's very old. Mommy said it was already there when she was little." "Anything else you remember about the neighborhood?" Thea asked. Tess thought for a moment. "There's a dog that barks a lot. It lives in the corner house. It's big and brown, and the fence has a hole where he sticks his nose out." Jules laughed. "He scares me." "But he never gets out of the yard," Tess assured. "Mommy always holds Jules's hand really tight when we pass by there." These were concrete clues that could be identified. Thea felt his excitement growing. "Tess, these drawings are perfect. Do you remember anything else?" The girl nodded and continued drawing. A small grocery store where they sometimes bought on credit, a bar on the corner, a warehouse where her mother delivered sewing work. "You know what else I remembered?" Tess said suddenly. "The bus we take to go downtown is the number 37. It's blue and white. It only comes once an hour, so Mommy always makes us run so we don't miss it." A bus route number was extremely useful information. "Tess, you're brilliant!" Thea exclaimed. While the children continued to draw, Thea searched on his phone. The number 37 bus line did exist and ended in a community on the city's south side, a place called Hope's Crossing, a settlement that had started as an irregular occupation. "Tess, have you ever heard of Hope's Crossing?" The girl's eyes widened. "That's where we live. Mommy always says that name when someone asks for our address." It was like finding the centerpiece of the puzzle. "Tomorrow we're going to Hope's Crossing," he announced, "and we're going to look for all these places you've drawn." "Are we going to find Mommy tomorrow?" Jules asked hopefully. "We're going to try very hard," Thea replied. That night, after putting the children to bed, Thea studied Tess's drawings, comparing them with satellite images of Hope's Crossing. The photographs showed a place very different from the elegant neighborhoods he frequented. Dirt roads, simple houses packed tightly together, few green spaces. When he finally went to bed, he had a clear plan for the next day. They would follow the number 37 bus route to its final stop in Hope's Crossing, and from there, they would search on foot for the landmarks Tess had drawn. In the morning, the excitement was palpable. Tess had carefully selected her most detailed drawings to bring as a reference. "What if Mommy's not home?" Jules asked during breakfast. "Then we'll talk to the neighbors," Thea replied. "Someone will know your mum and how to find her." They left right after breakfast. The trip to Hope's Crossing took longer than Thea had anticipated. The city traffic was heavy, and as they moved away from the center, the streets became progressively less maintained. When they finally reached the entrance to the community, the asphalt gave way to a packed dirt road. Thea slowed down, aware that his luxury car stood out completely in this environment. The narrow streets barely accommodated the vehicle, forcing him to maneuver carefully between playing children, parked carts, and potholes. "Are we close to the little park?" he asked Tess, who was looking out the window with growing excitement. "I think so," she replied. "You have to go straight and then turn right." Following the girl's instructions, Thea navigated the car through the narrow streets until it was impossible to continue driving. He parked in a space next to a small market. "We'll continue on foot," he suggested, helping the children out of the car. They walked slowly down the dirt road. As they turned a corner, they spotted a simple church with a modest bell tower, exactly like the one Tess had drawn. The girl stopped abruptly. "Thea," she said, her voice rising with excitement. "Ties just like my drawing." It was true. The resemblance was unmistakable, from the slightly crooked cross at the top to the concrete steps at the entrance. "Let's keep exploring," Thea suggested. "See if you recognize anything else." As they turned another corner, Tess pointed excitedly. "Look, the big tree." It was a truly impressive tree, an old oak that rose above the simple houses around it, its huge branches extending over the dirt road. Thea's heart sped up. They were on the right track. They moved on, with Tess now practically leading the way. Suddenly, a loud bark startled them. On the corner ahead, a large brown dog was pushing its snout through a hole in a makeshift fence. "The barking dog!" yelled Jules, clinging to Thea's hand. "It's him, Tess, it's him!" Tess was practically jumping with excitement. "We're close. Our house is after this street." They turned the corner, carefully passing the house with the noisy dog. The street was narrow, with small, simple houses lined up on both sides, many of them unfinished, with exposed bricks. Tess suddenly quickened her pace, pulling Jules along. "I remember this. We're close," she exclaimed, her voice trembling with emotion. They advanced quickly down the dirt road. "There!" Tess shouted suddenly, pointing to a small house with yellowish walls and a roof partially covered with makeshift shingles. "That's our house." It was exactly as in her drawing. The peeling walls, the small front garden with plants in reused cans, the clothesline with clothes in the yard. Before Thea could say anything, a figure appeared running at the end of the street. A young woman with dark hair tied in a messy bun, wearing a simple skirt and a faded t-shirt, was running towards them. "Tess! Jules!" she cried, her voice breaking with emotion. "Mommy!" the children shouted in unison, letting go of Thea and running towards the woman. Thea watched, frozen in place, as Evie fell to her knees on the packed dirt, her arms open to receive her children. Tess and Jules threw themselves against her with force. The three of them clung to each other in a desperate hug, sobs and laughter mixing together. "My children," Evie cried, covering their faces with kisses. "My babies. I thought I'd never see you again." She held them as if she feared they might disappear again, her hands touching their faces, hair, shoulders, as if to confirm they were real. "We got lost, Mommy," Tess explained between sobs. "We tried to come back, but we couldn't find the way." "Thea took care of us," added Jules, pointing to where Thea stood. Ivy looked up, noticing Thea for the first time. Her eyes, so much like Tess's, were filled with tears, but they conveyed a gratitude so deep that words seemed unnecessary. Slowly, she stood up, still holding the children's hands, and walked toward Thea. He noticed how young she was, probably no more than 30, though the worry lines on her face told stories of a hard life. "You," she began, her voice choked with emotion, "you found my children and brought them back to me." Thea felt a lump in his throat. "Actually, they found me. They found..." "And it was Tess who led us here, with her drawings." Evie looked at her daughter with pride through her tears. Always so smart, my girl. She looked back at Thea. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to, Thea replied. They are incredible kids. It was a privilege to take care of them. For a moment, the four of them stood there in a circle of connection that transcended the circumstances of their meeting and the stark differences between their worlds. Then Jules tugged on his mother's hand. Mommy, can I show Thea my room? Evie hesitated, glancing briefly at her simple home. But then she smiled, wiping away her tears. Of course you can, my love. She looked at Thea, a mixture of pride and shame in her eyes. Would you like to come in? It's nothing like you must be used to, but I'd love to, Thea answered sincerely. As he followed the small family down the dirt road towards the simple house, watching as Tess and Jules practically danced with joy around their mother, Thea felt something untie inside him. A journey was ending, but something told him that another, equally important one was just beginning. The house was small as fire, with only 3 rooms. A living room that also served as a kitchen, a shared bedroom for Evie and the children, and a tiny bathroom. The space was cramped but incredibly clean and organized. Every inch had been utilized with creativity. From the makeshift shelves made of painted wooden crates to the patched-up sofa covered with a colorful quilt made of scraps. Thea took it all in with a mix of emotions. There was simplicity here, but also dignity. The furniture was worn, some clearly second or third hand, but every object seemed to have a purpose and a place. Small personal touches, children's drawings tacked to the wall, a small vase with wildflowers on the table, curtains made of cheap but carefully sewn fabric, made the space feel welcoming. It's small, but it's enough for us, Evie said, closely watching Thea's reaction. There was a slight defensive tone in her voice, as if she expected judgment. It's a real home, he replied sincerely, realizing, perhaps for the first time, how his own luxurious apartment lacked the soul that this modest space possessed. Look, Thea. Jules pulled his hand. This is our room. The boy led him to the single bedroom, where there was an old double bed for Evie and a small bunk bed for the children. The walls were decorated with more drawings and magazine cutouts, natural landscapes and starry skies, animals, probably to compensate for the lack of proper windows. I sleep on top, Jules explained proudly, because I'm big now. Tess used to sleep on top, but now it's my turn. Tess, having recovered from the initial emotion of the reunion, continued to show off her belongings, a small collection of books, some worn but well cared for, a handmade rag doll, a box where she kept treasures, colored stones, shiny bottle caps, bird feathers. So Mummy made my doll, she explained, showing the cloth creation with buttons for eyes. She makes clothes for rich people, but she also makes things for us. As the children showed off their few toys, Thea noticed Evie at the door, watching the scene with a complex expression, gratitude, relief, but also a hint of embarrassment at exposing her poverty. They talked a lot about you, she said in a low voice, as the children got distracted organizing an impromptu presentation of their treasures. How did you find them? Thea briefly recounted the rainy night, the temporary shelter that turned into days of care, and the search they undertook together. I was desperate, Evie confessed, her voice breaking slightly. I looked everywhere. I went to the police, but... She hesitated, implying she hadn't received the attention she had hoped for. I missed work, risked losing my job, but I couldn't stop looking. You would have done the same for them, Thea replied softly. They returned to the living room, where Evie prepared a simple coffee. It's all I can offer right now, served in chipped but clean mugs. The children played in the small space between the table and the sofa, now completely at ease in their familiar environment. Seated at the small table, Evie looked at Thea with tear-filled eyes. Thank you for taking care of my children, she said, her voice choked with restrained emotion. I was desperate, thinking the worst. You don't know what it meant to know they were safe, with someone who treated them well. The sincerity in her eyes hit Thea deeply. This woman, who had so little, offered a gratitude so genuine that no monetary value could match it. It was my pleasure to care for them, he replied, meaning every word. You have very special children. Evie smiled through her tears, and for a moment they sat in silence, just watching the children play. It was then that something caught Thaya's eye. On the small makeshift shelf next to the sofa, among a few books and cheap decorative objects, was a worn wooden frame. Inside it, a photograph. Intrigued, Thaya moved closer to get a better look. The photo showed a younger Evie with a baby Tess on her lap, next to a man holding a newborn Jules. The man was smiling broadly at the camera, his arm around Evie's shoulders, forming a perfect picture of a happy family. Thaya picked up the frame, feeling a jolt of recognition run through his body. That face, that smile. He knew it. "Is this Aaron Burke?" he asked, his voice strangely altered. Evie looked surprised. "Yes. Did you know him?" Thaya kept staring at the photo, as if he could travel back in time through that image. "Yes, we went to high school together. We were friends for years, until we drifted apart when I went to college." Silence fell over the room, broken only by the distant sounds of the children in the bedroom. Evie approached, looking from the photo to Thaya, perplexed. "Are you that Thaya?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Aaron always talked about a childhood friend named Thaya. He said you two promised to change the world together." Thaya felt something tighten in his chest. Memories long buried under the weight of responsibilities and ambitions resurfaced. Aaron Burke, his best friend throughout his teenage years. The smart, idealistic boy who always challenged him to think beyond money, beyond status. "He used to tell stories about you two," Evie continued, sitting on the sofa as if her legs had lost their strength. "How you used to skip class to go bird-watching in the park. How you planned to travel the world after graduation." "We had big plans," Thaya murmured, still holding the photograph. "Aaron wanted to be a teacher, to work with kids in underserved communities. He always believed that education was the way to change the world." "That's what he did," Evie said, with a sad, proud smile. "He taught volunteer classes here in the community. That's how we met. And I went to business school," Thaya continued, more to himself than to Evie. "I followed the path my father had laid out. Our lives took completely different directions. He never judged you for it," Evie said softly. "He always spoke of his friend Thaya with affection. He said you were like oil and water, but that you completed each other." Thaya looked at the children, who were now returning from the room carrying more drawings to show. Tess, with her observant eyes and caring nature. Jules, and with his easy smile and contagious enthusiasm. Suddenly, he saw traces of Aaron in both of them, not just physical features, but something deeper, a familiar essence. "He died in a car accident," Evie said, following Thaya's gaze to the children. "He was on his way back from a night class. Jules had just been born." "I didn't know," Thaya admitted, feeling the weight of the loss of a friend he didn't even know he had lost. "We lost touch. I should have looked for him." Evie touched his arm gently. "Life takes strange paths. Who would have thought that one day his children would find you?" Thaya looked again at the photograph, then at Tess and Jules, who were now approaching curiously, sensing the change in the room's atmosphere. "Of all the dark streets, on all the rainy nights," he murmured, "they ended up right in front of me." "What are you looking at?" asked Tess, stretching to see the photograph in Thaya's hands. "It's your dad," Thaya answered softly. "We were friends when we were about your age." Tess's eyes widened. "You knew Daddy?" "I did," Thaya confirmed, crouching down to show the photo better to the children, "and he was an incredible person." "Can you tell us stories about him?" asked Jules, his eyes shining with the possibility of knowing more about the father he barely knew. "Many stories," Thaya promised, feeling an emotion he couldn't name. "The next time I visit, I'll tell you all of them." The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light through the small living room window. Evie looked at Thaya with an expression of astonishment and something akin to reverence. "It wasn't a coincidence, was it?" she asked quietly. "You finding the children that night?" Thaya shook his head, equally stunned by the twists of fate. "I don't think so." Somehow, on a rainy night, fate had not only brought lives together, but had also reconnected stories that seemed lost forever, as if Aaron, from somewhere beyond comprehension, had guided his children to the old friend he had left behind. And now, sitting in that small room filled with love, Thaya knew his life had changed irrevocably. The circle was complete. The story, far from over, was just beginning a new chapter. The drive back seemed longer than it actually was. Thea drove slowly through the city streets, his mind still processing the series of coincidences, or were they purposes, that had connected his life to Tess and Jules's. Aaron Burke, his childhood friend, the idealist who chose a path so different from his own, whose children, by some inexplicable twist of fate, had crossed his path on a rainy night. The city lights reflected on the windshield, occasionally blurring as he blinked away the unexpected moisture in his eyes. He had promised to return on the weekend to bring some books for Tess and a toy car for Jules. Small gifts, not out of charity, but out of connection. Evie had been reluctant at first, but gave in when she saw the children's enthusiasm. "Just simple things?" she had asked, the pride evident in her voice. When he finally parked in the garage of his luxury building, Thea remained in the car for a few moments, as if gathering the strength to return to his normal life. Howard, the doorman, nodded respectfully as he saw him pass through the lobby. "Did you find the children's family, Mr. Monroe?" "Yes, Howard, we found them." "That's good. I hope they're well." "They are," Thea replied, stopping briefly. "In fact, their father was an old friend of mine." Howard raised his eyebrows, genuinely surprised. "It's a small world, isn't it, sir?" "Smaller than we imagine." The elevator took him silently to the top floor. When the doors opened directly into his apartment, Thea was greeted by nothing. Absolute silence. The automatic lights switched on, revealing the impeccably clean and organized space, the result of the cleaning crew's visit, who came twice a week whether he was there or not. Thea took a few steps inside, his shoes echoing slightly on the polished hardwood floor. Everything was exactly as it should be. The leather sofa perfectly aligned, the decorative cushions in their designated spots, the surfaces free of any clutter. His apartment had always been an example of minimalist, luxurious design, a space that design magazines would love to photograph, and now for the first time it felt completely empty. He walked slowly through the room, noticing how each step produced a small echo. There was an almost oppressive silence there, a silence he had never noticed before, or maybe he had noticed, but never cared. After all, silence had always been his constant companion. In the kitchen, the first thing he saw were Jules's drawings still stuck to the refrigerator door with colorful magnets, formless explosions of color that he had proudly called abstract art, after Thea used the term to describe them. Next to it, a more elaborate drawing by Tess, a depiction of all of them having breakfast together. Thea touched the paper with his fingertips, feeling a strange pressure in his chest. The dining table, now perfectly tidy, showed no sign of the creative chaos of art supplies that had dominated it for the past few days. The children's mugs he had bought, a blue one with dinosaurs for Jules, a purple one with stars for Tess, were clean and stored in the cabinet, visible when he opened it to get a glass. In the master bathroom, the bath toys had been removed. The small toothbrush with a bear-shaped head was no longer next to his. The living room sofa, where the children had slept, was now restored to its original function as an impeccable decorative piece. No sign of blankets, extra pillows, or the small teddy bear he had bought for Jules after the boy casually mentioned he'd never had one. In his bedroom, Thea sat on the edge of the perfectly made bed, looking at the space around him. The silence was almost tangible now, a presence in itself. It wasn't just the absence of sound, but the absence of life, of unexpected laughter, of curious questions, of small feet running down the hall. "Thea, look what I drew." "Thea, can you read one more story?" "Thea, why is the sky blue?" "Thea, do you think Mommy is looking for us?" The voices in his memory were so vivid that he almost expected to see the children walk through the door at any moment, but the door remained closed, the apartment silent. He hadn't realized, during those hectic days of worry, chaos, and searching, how his solitary routine had been completely transformed, how his space, once a refuge of tranquility after long days of corporate meetings and decisions, had become a noisy, messy, and incredibly vibrant home. And now, everything was back to normal, to what was supposed to be normal. So why did it feel so wrong? Thea stood up and walked to the window, watching the city lights below. Somewhere, on the south side, in a small house with yellowish walls, Tess and Jules were probably already asleep, safe in the arms of the mother they had so feared they would never see again. The thought brought a smile to his lips, despite the strange melancholy he felt. His phone vibrated with an email notification, something about an important meeting the next morning. Reality was calling, demanding his return. Tomorrow he would go back to being the efficient, focused CEO. He would go back to wearing immaculate suits and making decisions that affected hundreds of people. He would go back to business lunches at expensive restaurants and conversations about stocks and investments. But something had changed, something fundamental. The silence, which had once been just the natural backdrop of his existence, now seemed to highlight an absence, a void he didn't know he could feel. At some point during those chaotic days, between noodle soup and bedtime stories, between drawings on the fridge and searching for clues, Thea had formed a real bond with those children. A bond he wasn't prepared to feel. A bond that, he now realized, he didn't want to break. The weekend seemed absurdly far away, 5 whole days until he could see them again. Until he could hear Jules's laughter and Tess's surprisingly profound observations. 5 days of returning to the silence. Thea went back to the living room and sat on the sofa. The same sofa where he had held 2 crying children in his arms, promising he would find their mother. A promise fulfilled, but one that had somehow transformed his own life in the process. The silence of the apartment enveloped him completely now. But for the first time, Thea truly heard it, and he knew he would never be able to ignore it as he had before. The seasons changed. The rainy autumn gave way to winter, which yielded to spring and then summer. With them, the rhythms of life and connections that once seemed unlikely were also transformed. That first weekend visit was just the beginning. Thea arrived with the promised gifts and a basket of groceries. "I thought we could cook together," he suggested, noticing Evie's eyes widen at the abundance he considered modest. That lunch broke invisible barriers. Jules discovered that Thea didn't know how to make paper airplanes and took on the responsibility of teaching him. Tess was fascinated by the stories about constellations he told, something Aaron had also done on the rare nights they could see the stars. Before leaving, Thea noticed the leaky roof. "Can I take a look at that next weekend?" he offered. Evie hesitated, pride battling with practical need. "That would be nice," she finally admitted. The following week, the roof repair turned into a weekend project, with Jules supervising, Tess organizing the tools, and Evie providing fresh lemonade. When the rain fell days later, no buckets were needed. To celebrate, Evie sewed a cushion for Thea's sofa. "So your apartment doesn't look so impersonal." The visits became regular. On Saturdays, Thea would go to their house, bringing small, necessary contributions, school supplies, a new light bulb, a better pot. On Sundays, sometimes the children would visit his apartment. "So just for a few hours?" Evie would insist, still uncomfortable with the idea of her children experiencing a world so different from their own. For these visits, Thea adapted his space. A shelf in the living room now held children's books and games. A guest room was painted in vibrant colors and fitted with beds suitable for children. The refrigerator always had yogurt, fruit, and chocolate. The changes went beyond the physical space. After discovering that Evie worked as a seamstress for a shop that paid very little, Thea mentioned in a meeting, "I know someone with exceptional skills." 2 weeks later, Evie received an offer to work in the production of corporate uniforms, with a fixed salary, benefits and hours compatible with the children's school schedule. It wasn't charity, he insisted when she questioned it. It was recognition of talent. When school started, Thea offered to help Tess with her homework. Aaron would have done this, he explained simply. The study sessions would end with stories about the children's father, carefully retrieved memories that gave Tess and Jules pieces of the man they barely knew. "Feel he wanted to change the world, you know," Thea told her once, while helping Tess with math problems. Starting with children, he used to say that if every person raised one child well, the world would be a better place. "Like you're doing with us?" Tess asked, with that perceptiveness that always surprised him. Thea smiled, touched. "I guess so. Maybe it's my way of honoring his memory." Over time, their lives intertwined. Howard, the doorman, kept candy for when the children visited. In his office, Thea kept a photo of the four of them taken during an outing. "Your family?" a client asked once. "So how very special, friends," Thea replied, realizing the word friends wasn't enough, but that any other definition would be too complicated. The most profound transformation was in the people. Evie smiled more, the weight of worry visibly lighter. Tess excelled in school, and Jules radiated the confidence of someone who feels secure. And Thea discovered that the silence in his apartment was no longer oppressive. Even when he was alone, the space seemed to hold echoes of the laughter that now regularly filled it. On a Sunday afternoon, while Evie was resting, Thea watched Tess drawing intently. "I'm finished," she finally announced. "Shows this is for you to put on your wall." The drawing showed a house with 3 large windows, each with a colored heart, one red, one blue, and one purple. In front, a blooming garden with flowers of all colors. In the sky, a smiling sun and flying birds. "It's a house for all of us," Tess explained seriously. "We don't have to really live in it. But it exists in the heart." Thea felt a lump in his throat. "It's the most beautiful house I've ever seen." That night, he hung the drawing in the center of the main wall in his living room. The explosion of color contrasted with the sophisticated decor, but it looked exactly as it should. In the following months, other small changes occurred. A modest renovation improved the electrical system in Evie's house. A garden was planted, where Jules proudly grew vegetables for when Thea comes for lunch. The children's clothes, still simple, were now new, practical gifts that Evie accepted with a mix of gratitude and pride. Their routines intertwined naturally. Thea would adjust meetings to pick Tess up from school when needed. Evie would mend his suits and laugh at his inability to sew a button. The children knew their way around his apartment as well as they knew their own home. There was no name for what they had become, not a traditional family and nor just a friendship. It was something woven from memory, gratitude, and simple love, growing as naturally as the flowers in Tess's drawing. On an ordinary evening, months after that storm that changed everything, Thea contemplated his apartment, the children's books on the shelf, the cushion made by Evie, the drawing of the house with 3 hearts, small signs of a constant presence. His apartment, once a monument to elegant loneliness, now housed something precious. Where there was once only concrete and silence, there now existed connection, memory, and simple love. And that was more than enough. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.